Okay, so sometimes when I write like scripts and come up with ideas for scenes and things to do, I will often sit down and write, and I will imagine a scene a way that I want it to play out. I will say exterior park, rain, and I will go to shoot the scene on the park, and there will be rain, and that's the most magical feeling in the world. When you're planning something, when you're hoping for something to go a certain way, and then there's a certain magical synergy with the universe, and it just works out this way. Of course, this works in reverse as well. Sometimes, as a filmmaker, you imagine certain things a certain way, and then everything just goes to hell. You imagine sun, and there's rain. You want this actor to be there, and they're sick. I cannot even begin to tell you the things that I've had to compromise to cope with reality and the way that it shows up. And I think that as a filmmaker, both these kind of like balances I have to like push through are events that I go through. The joy of co-creating with the universe and the pain of having to cope with it. So guess which one of these two I'm here to talk to you about today. Some directors, in order to cope with this reality anxiety, they have storyboards. You know what those are, right? They're like comic book renditions of your shot list. So if I want a scene to be a certain way, I will map it out in a storyboard. That's not really what I do. What I do sometimes is I create what is called a floor plan of a scene. So when I'm really immersed in the making of something in a scene, and sometimes I want to take a step back and view things from a holistic perspective, I create this. And this is what people call a floor plan. What I call it is, I call it the relax map. The relax map is kind of like this life philosophy that I've cooked up. And it works both on and off the set, in that whenever you are in a situation and you're experiencing the drama of it, if you take like a step back and if you view the whole thing from above, then you get to see the story and you get to see yourself as part of that story and where you are. So on set, I often pull out my floor plan, my relax map, and things make sense again, as I do in life. My journey as a filmmaker began when I was 13. This is me at 13, 2003, in Paris, making my first film. And this was like a month or two ago, at 22, inside a helicopter, filming some beautiful aerial shots of Athens in an actual film produced by actual people with actual money, which for me was, and still is, mind-boggling. And thinking about the journey has made me realize many, many things about the relax map. Being on top of Athens and flying, I came to see Athens from a holistic perspective. When you're driving in the city, and when you're completely lost in its free association of concrete, it becomes very difficult to see the context of it all. It's only when you check the relax map, things from above, that you can truly, truly see yourself in the context. So ultimately, the relax map can work both geographically, culturally, but also personally. And the way that I've structured my journey as a filmmaker has been from that bird's eye view. And thinking back from the things that have made me who I am, I think that basically there have been 4 major steps that I've had to take as a filmmaker, the 4 lines of my relax map. Number 1 was recognizing what I wanted to do, discovering my passion. Number 2 was taking that and actually convincing other people that that is in fact what I want to do. That's a very tricky step for anybody who's passionate about anything. The next step was learning to live outside of my comfort zone. I lived and studied for a long time in the USA, and crossing borders between worlds was one of the things I had to master and learn how to do. And the final step, the final line of my relax map, was overcoming my own body and overcoming the fear of death to master, the final stage of the journey, which is freedom to live. When I was really young, growing up as an only child in a very warm environment with 2 wonderful parents who are somewhere here. By the way, parents are awesome, and I highly recommend them. I because of my lonely childhood, I grew up watching many, many films every day. I grew up in an environment where it was natural and automatic to watch 8 or 9 films every single day. And that was kind of like my growth experience. It was like, I didn't have friends, I had characters. You know, E.T. was my best friend, and I wouldn't play with other kids. My adventure was on the Great Plains of Arabia with Lawrence. And that was kind of like my baptism, my christening onto the world of film. But still, how do you take a hobby or something you love to do, and how do you recognize that that's what you want to do? And that is something that people do struggle with today. I think that something magical happened to me when I was a child. I think it was my father who came to me, and he asked me a very, very tricky but fundamental question. He said, "Steph, what would you do if there was no money? What would you do if money didn't matter?" We all gear ourselves towards struggling to make more money because that is the cultural norm that we are taught to follow. But then again, if you just take money out of the equation, if you park money for just a second, you will begin to see what you're truly good at and what you love doing, and that's the shift, is that if you're good at it, then ultimately you begin to monetize it inevitably. And I think this is more relevant today than it has been ever, because the economic system is proving itself broken every single day that is going by. So people should just take a step back from money and realize, what would they do if money was no object? And that was my beginning. That was when I was like 12 or 13. That was my crossing that threshold when I realized that being a filmmaker was what I wanted to do. And I truly, truly did it. When I was 13, I directed my first film, my first major film. I was in love with that whole experience. This is me commanding, a crew of adults, and it was like a game for me, and it was just beautiful. If you had to guess what my first film was about, what would you say? It was about the beginning of a journey, because that's where I was in life. Because once I took a step back and viewed things from the position of my relax map, I saw myself in the beginning of the journey. So obviously, my first film had to be about beginnings. But then, once you master the art of what you do within yourself, the real trick is learning how to sell and pitch what you love and what you do to others. How many of you have heard this word? No. Then you know, right? Wait, not all of you? Wow. The first people I had to convince were my parents, and then this happens to me all the time. Even now, you walk into a producer's office and you say, "Please, sir, give me your money." And they will say, "Why you?" I've had this happen to me since I was 13. I've had producers with big fat cigars look at me from, the top of their castle and say, "Why you? What do you bring to the conversation that we cannot get from a professional?" Under that pressure of that question was when I unknowingly came up with the answer. I said, "Well, you know what? I'm a child. I bring innocence to the conversation." And that was the trick in realizing that to be good at what you do, you have to still believe that the world is wonderful. You have to know that there's magic somewhere there. And so that's a question that I still and always ask myself is, am I staying innocent? Do I still have wonder for what's to come? Or am I jaded and cynical? So I went on from when I was 13 all the way to 17 to direct many, many short films. And a lot of these films went on to win many awards and festivals, and I was very, very happy about that. And I was still kind of like in the game of it all. I'm going to talk about these 3 films for just a second. This is a trilogy that I directed that I called the Death Trilogy. And if you had to guess, what were those 3 films about? Innocence. Because that's where I was in the journey. Because once I took back and saw the relax map, I saw that that was the stage that I was in. I was innocent. So obviously, my output had to be one of innocence. And that is a question that I always ask myself is, am I staying innocent? And I got to travel all over the world. I went to Cannes, Berlin, Mannheim. What a wonderful time that was, because I was traveling a lot and experiencing different things and different people. However, this constant traveling, this constant crossing of borders was preparing me for the next stage of my journey. And this is the real tricky one. Crossing borders between worlds. When I was 17, I chose to go to America to study filmmaking, like many a Greek had done before in the great century. I moved to the US to study filmmaking, and it was a hard experience, because there's so much that you have to sacrifice when you're living abroad. How many of you have lived outside of your country? Okay, well then you know. You know the loneliness that comes with it. You know how sometimes people, and you know what? It's the worst kind of loneliness, when you're surrounded by people and you still feel that nobody truly knows who you are. This is the view that I had for about a year from room 426 in Boston at Emerson College. I think that the first thing that I did was play crazy. The first defense mechanism was kind of like construct this fortress of craziness. Because when you're crazy, people understand you better. You don't have to explain things to anybody. Crazy Stefanos, the crazy Greek. It became safe for me. But then I had to ultimately transform and shift myself into this person. And when I took a step back and viewed things from my relax map, I kind of saw myself as this person who crosses borders, as this being who will forever be on a journey of transformation. The journey is the key. We must always be on a journey. We must always change. We must always transform. We must always accept calls to adventure and usher onto the world of the magic forest. Because who we are as beings are, beings of motion. And I always ask this of myself, am I on a journey? Or am I stuck in inertia? Or am I stuck in geography, in a relationship, in a job, in a mentality, in a mindset? If the answer is yes, maybe it's time to move on. The films that I made during the 4 years that I was back and forth between Greece and America, crossing borders, what were they about? Can you guess? The journey, because that's where I was. These are all snapshots from films that I made during that time, and they all have people crossing borders. They all show people on a journey. They all have people moving on and letting go, because that was the stage that I was experiencing when I was, viewing myself from above on the relax map. And I think there was something really magical about that time, because I was able to sublimate my own anxiety of being away from home, my own separation anxiety, and kind of like justify it by saying that being on a journey is okay. Stepping back and seeing things from the relax map made me realize that I am on a journey right now. And I think that the most important part of being on a journey is that, and that is from personal experience, if you want to move on, then you have to let go. And the reason why some people get stuck, I think, and can't move on is because they're holding on to things that they should let go. If you want to venture onto a new thing, this is called opportunity cost in economics. It means that ultimately, if you want to venture onto a new anything, there has to be a trade-off. There has to be something that you have to let go. This is something that I always ask myself at almost every single stage of my life and every day. Am I letting go? I have some time. I'm going to read this to you. So this is a text that I received some days ago from my current girlfriend. So I tend to be very flirty as a person with women, and that's okay. So here's a text that I got. In economics, we call this opportunity cost, the benefit foregone of the next best alternative. Being with me involves an opportunity cost of not being free to flirt. When you make a choice, trade-offs need to be made. There is no halfway. Yes, please do. Being on a journey and being able to let go means accepting the small deaths that you have to go through every day. And ultimately, the journey of transformation ushers you into what we call freedom to live. What you're seeing right now is a scan of my brain. I have come into this world with the best intentions, right? But I have grown up with a very peculiar disease. See, I have a cyst in my frontal left temporal lobe. I was born with part of my brain missing, and there is a large cyst in there. And if that cyst ever bursts, I may die, or I may end up in a comatose state for the rest of my life. And I've known about this for a long time. And there's a certain, shift that happens within you, because when you have the constant threat of death inside of you, you tend to remember your mortality more than anybody else would. People often tend to not realize that fear of death, our culture and our whole rhetoric is built around avoiding fear of death or overcoming fear of death. What I have in my brain right now is a reminder that death is just around the corner. I think that we should all be very healthy in our remembrance of our mortality, because then we will achieve urgency. The reason why I've done so many things ultimately in my life, the reason why I have been so urgent, is because I've lived with this constant ticking bomb inside of my head saying that, hey, if you don't make each day a masterpiece, then you might not get a next day. But ultimately, the idea of it is, and the idea of it is that not only do I get to live my life in that way, in the now, but all of my films have to do with this theme of resurrection, of rising up, of going through the torturous ordeal, through the abyss, and coming up afresh, anew, resurrected. Because ultimately, we're all mortal. And I think that looking at the relax map and knowing that it's finite, that it might end, I came to ask myself, am I urgent? And that has been the fundamental question that I ask myself all the time, because it's finite and it does end. From the perspective of that bird's eye view, when you step back, when you're so immersed into things that are happening, you can't really see the big picture. Through my relax map, I came to ask myself these questions. What happens when you take a step back and you look at things from above and you see the story and yourselves as part of it? You are somewhere on that wheel of the journey, but you cannot see it because you're in it. Step back and realize that there's a journey ahead of you. We talk about the ones who do, and we talk about doing as the end-all be-all of success, but I think that it's who you are that is important as well. What I'm going to propose right now is a deviant. It's what you do despite who you are. Who you are is the beginning of the journey, and then what you do is what you build on top of it. And if you view life from above, from that helicopter, from the relax map that I'm proposing, then all of a sudden you see yourself in context. If you're repeating a step, you will know it. Sometimes we get so stuck and we see a wall in front of us and we think there's nothing beyond it. If we look up and we see ourselves as part of an ongoing story, we might discover that there's a whole paradise beyond that wall. And I'm going to close with one of my favorite lines from one of my favorite films of the 80s. And it goes like this: life moves pretty fast. If you don't stop to look around once in a while, you might miss it. You know what? Life does not hand out excuses for absences. We have to make it there, even if we're a bit late. And that's written on your instruction, behind your relax maps. And that's kind of magic. Thank you.